In the news tonight, His Majesty the King entrusts RAJAI MUASHER with heading a royal committee to evaluate work and accomplishments of the National Integrity Charter and Executive Plan to enhance national integrity. An Israeli minister lashes out against the U.S. Secretary of State's warning of a boycott if Palestinian-Israeli peace talks fail and accuses Kerry of holding a gun to Israel's head in the peace negotiations. And the Iraqi army intensifies its shelling of Fallujah in preparation for a ground assault to regain control of the city, which has been under the control of militants for a month. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. Here are the details. His Majesty the King entrusted Dr. RAJAI MUASHER with heading a royal committee to evaluate work and accomplishments of the National Integrity Charter and Executive Plan to enhance national integrity. In a letter to MUASHER, the King said the National Integrity Charter and Executive Plan to enhance national integrity are among the milestones in Jordan's comprehensive reform process that aim to ensure Jordanians a better future through enhanced democracy, justice, and respect of human rights. The King voiced pride in the Royal Committee's accomplishments, especially in addressing various challenges facing the Kingdom. The King urged all national authorities and institutions to fully cooperate in adopting the Charter and to implement its executive plan. His Majesty received the National Integrity Charter and its executive plan during a ceremony to launch the Charter in December 2013. Israeli Strategic Affairs Minister Yuval Steinitz says U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is holding a gun to Israel's head by warning it could face international isolation should peace negotiations with the Palestinians fail. He said Kerry's remarks were unfair and described them as a threat against Israel. Yesterday, Kerry, in a discussion at the Security Conference in Munich, pointed to an increasing delegitimization campaign building up against Israel internationally and talk of boycotts if the Israeli-Palestinian conflict did not end. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the weekly cabinet meeting called any attempts to impose a boycott on Israel immoral and unjustified. He said no pressure will cause him to forfeit Israel's vital interests, chiefly the security of its citizens. In Syria, government forces continued the aerial bombardment of rebel-held areas across the country. As the first round of international peace talks in Geneva finished, video posted on a social media website purported to show a bomb being dropped from a military helicopter over the town of Hanano in Syria's Aleppo province. Another video said to have been filmed yesterday showed the aftermath of a bombing in Tariq al-Bab, also in Aleppo province. In Germany, meanwhile, and on the third and last day of the Security Conference in Munich, delegates at a Middle East panel debated the civil war in Syria, with Saudi Arabia and Turkey calling for a stronger international position against the country. Saudi Prince Turki al-Faisal, former Director General Intelligence, accused the Assad government of genocide and called for more support for the Syrian opposition. And Turkey's Foreign Minister Ahmet Davutoglu called for stronger action from the United Nations Security Council.
I accuse the Bashar regime of genocide and crimes against humanity. And I accuse Iran of being complicit and supporting Bashar in this effort.
I have to be very frank here. We are suffering, Syrian people are suffering, and P5 and UN Security Council are having long meetings without any single resolution for the last 3 years.
Also in Germany, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry met Iran's Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif on the sidelines of a security conference where he pressed Tehran to abide by its commitments over its nuclear program. Kerry's meeting with Zarif came after Iran agreed in November to halt its most sensitive uranium enrichment activities in return for an easing of Western sanctions. Zarif said it would be a disaster if Tehran did not turn a provisional agreement into a permanent deal. The six world powers and Iran will begin talks in Vienna on the 18th on a long-term deal for Tehran to curb parts of its nuclear program in exchange for a gradual end to sanctions.
I think the opportunity is there. I think this is a historic opportunity. I think we need to seize it. I think if we don't, if we work on the basis of illusions, we will regret it in the days to come and years to come.
EU Foreign Policy Chief Catherine Ashton welcomed talks between the U.S. Secretary of State and the Iranian Foreign Minister, saying it is very important that the international community looks to comprehensive talks with Iran. And over to Iraq, where the Iraqi army intensified shelling of Fallujah in preparation for a ground assault to regain control over the city, which has been under the control of militants for a month. Mostly Sunni Muslim anti-government fighters, among them insurgents linked to Al-Qaeda, overran Fallujah in the Sunni-dominated western province of Anbar early last month, taking advantage of deteriorating security across Iraq. Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki had held off an all-out offensive to give local tribesmen a chance to expel the militants themselves. But security officials said yesterday a decision was made to enter Fallujah today. The officials say artillery and planes are being used over the city to detect the potential abilities of militants inside Fallujah and try to find a gap to get into the city. The offensive is coordinated between troops and tribal fighters. The United Arab Emirates summoned the Qatari ambassador over insults made by cleric Yusuf al-Qardawi in a broadcast from Doha. UAE media said the foreign ministry handed the Qatari ambassador an official protest memorandum over what it is described as the insolence shown by Qardawi towards the United Arab Emirates. Qardawi, in a sermon 2 weeks ago at a mosque in Doha and broadcast by state television, condemned the UAE as a country that is against Islamic rule. In a statement, the UAE foreign minister said his country waited for Qatar to express a clear rejection of that insolence and to offer sufficient clarifications. But unfortunately, Qatar did not. The statement further said it is shameful that Qardawi is allowed to continue his insults of the UAE. But in response, Qatari Foreign Minister Khal said Qardawi's comments do not reflect Qatar's views and that Qatar's foreign policy is expressed only through the official channels of the state. Ukraine opposition leaders just back home from the Munich Security Conference are calling for a strengthening of the mass protests in the country and the creation of self-defense units. After getting international backing in Munich, they are calling for a complete change of leadership and are promising supporters they would secure international economic aid if they are able to take power.
With protesters still camped out in Ukraine, ongoing unrest appears far from over. After months of protests and clashes, anti-government demonstrators and the state have reached a stalemate. But at the Kiev airport, boxer turned opposition leader Vitaly Klitschko comes home with renewed energy.
We would really like the authorities to listen to the people and not pretend that nothing is happening. Only then can we solve the problems. But to hide heads in the sand and pretend that nothing is going on will not solve the problems, but rather hide it in a far corner.
Klitschko and other opposition leaders had been in Munich, successfully lobbying the international community for support. Protesters at a mass rally Sunday welcomed the news.
We were told that we are supported by the whole international community. They were told in Munich that the whole international community shares our hopes and supports us. That's why today's rally was a success.
And with thousands supporting the cause, this fight won't end quietly.
Election day in Thailand passed off peacefully, but observers believe the country is no nearer to ending an intractable political conflict, with the winner facing the prospect of months of paralysis, protests, and complex legal challenges. Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra thanked Thais who headed to polling stations across the country to vote. The main opposition Democrat Party, however, boycotted the election. With no results to be announced, Yingluck will remain caretaker premier for weeks, facing continued anti-government protests and the prospect of a slew of legal challenges aimed at invalidating the poll. PUNXSUTAWNEY Phil, a famed U.S. groundhog with an even more famous shadow, emerged from his burrow today and predicted 6 more weeks of winter in the U.S. Thousands gathered at the annual Groundhog Day ceremony in Pennsylvania and were quite disappointed with the news. Groundhogs have been offering weather predictions in the tiny town of PUNXSUTAWNEY since 1887. Here's a story.
Okay, to wake Phil up, we gotta wake
Punxsutawney Phil predicts 6 more weeks of winter. The famous rodent emerged from his burrow in the western Pennsylvania town of Punxsutawney on Sunday, Groundhog Day. According to legend, if Phil sees his shadow, there'll be 6 more weeks of snow and freezing temperatures. If he doesn't, the U.S. can expect an early spring. Phil did see his shadow, and with it dashed any hopes for an early end to winter weather. And for the first time ever, Groundhog Day coincides with the Super Bowl.
A Super Bowl winner I will not predict, but my weather forecast you cannot contradict. Why, that's not a football, but my shadow I see. It's 6 more weeks of winter. It must be.
The Denver Broncos face off against the Seattle Seahawks in East Rutherford, New Jersey, Sunday for Super Bowl 48. No sub-zero winter forecast for the game.
People from all over the world celebrated the Chinese New Year in London in what is the biggest year of the horse party outside of China. Around 500,000 celebrated the New Year, starting with a dragon dance snaking its way through central London and Chinatown. Chinatown, London is also celebrating 12 years of festivities being held in the historic Trafalgar Square. Queen Elizabeth and British Prime Minister David Cameron also sent goodwill messages to the Trafalgar Square crowds. The Year of the Horse takes over from the Year of the Snake in the Chinese zodiac calendar system, which originated in the Han Dynasty. It names each of the years in its 12-year cycle after an animal. Only a few days away from the Sochi Winter Games, and controversy was mounting over the state of readiness of the accommodation, which will be welcoming many visitors to the Games. Some rooms in hotels were not ready as the first guests showed up, and some hotels are even still under construction. Workers are on site more common than tourists or guests for the final touches. Hotel owners described the setbacks as a slight delay, although initial plans were to open in November, then to open last month. And looking to the Sochi Winter Olympics, Ted Ligeti won the giant slalom in St. Moritz, Switzerland, to take the World Cup event. The American set a scorching pace in the first run to lead the field by 1.28 seconds. Austria's Marcel Hirscher came in second, followed by France's Alexis Pinturault. Barcelona and Argentina star Lionel Messi said yesterday was a bad day as his team had just left the door open for Madrid rivals Atletico and Real to move above them in La Liga. Barca suffered their first home defeat of the season 3-2 against Valencia. Yet despite the setback, Messi says his eyes are set now on success this season, both with Barca in La Liga and with Argentina in the World Cup. He said reaching the World Cup final in Rio de Janeiro was in Argentina's sights, and winning it would be a dream come true. And finally, cold and partly cloudy weather continues tonight with a remaining possibility for scattered rain. Tomorrow, the kingdom remains under the effect of unstable rainy weather conditions, while winds will be northeasterly to northwesterly moderate. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect relatively cold conditions tonight, but fair tomorrow, while winds will be northerly moderate and the seas slightly choppy. Now, as a look at temperatures forecast for tonight. That's all. And to close, here's a reminder of the day's top stories. His Majesty the King entrusts RAJAI MUASHER with heading a royal committee to evaluate work and accomplishments of the National Integrity Charter and Executive Plan to enhance national integrity. An Israeli minister lashes out against the U.S. Secretary of State's warning of a boycott if Palestinian-Israeli peace talks fail, and accuses Kerry of holding a gun to Israel's head in the peace negotiations. And the Iraqi army intensifies its shelling of Fallujah in preparation for a ground assault to regain control of the city, which has been under the control of militants for a month. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Alia Turkan. Thank you for joining us and have a good night.